Okay, in this presentation, we will talk about Jesus clearing the temple court. You can find this written in John 2, verses 13 through 25. This is taking place about the age of 28, when Jesus was 28 years old. And I think this pericope is so important for Christians today. It's just like the Bible is important for Christians. This is specifically important because it lets us see how Jesus reacted to a bad situation. He knew that this was wrong. He knew that these business practices were wrong, and he needed to speak out against it. Now, for Christians today, many of us have been taught to turn the other cheek, which the Bible talks about that. And if you've been in a situation where people say, oh, you're a Christian, just forgive that person. They don't need to owe you that money. Just wash their debt clean. Sometimes there's a time and place for that. Other times there's not. Perhaps you've been told, oh, you're a Christian, let bygones be bygones, and just forgive that person for the way they've treated you. Sometimes there's a reason for that. Sometimes there's not. I believe we need to pick our battles. And in this case, Jesus gives us an example of a time and place where he had to speak up. He had to say no. He had to say, this is wrong. And the way that he did this, I believe, gives us as Christians an example to emulate. He didn't attack people. He did this with love and respect and compassion, but he did it nevertheless because he had to make a stand that what was happening was not correct. It was not honoring God. And I believe when we can look at things that way, and in this case, we saw where the governing authorities had actually given permission for this to happen. So just because the government says it's correct doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. And that was the case here. So this pericope will give us the examples that we need to help us know how to handle certain situations today. All right, so let's get started. To understand the reason for Jesus and his zealousness in this specific situation, we need to understand what was happening. He was going to the Passover in Jerusalem. Now, for us today as Christians, many of us don't think about Passover. We don't know anything about Passover. And a lot of people wonder, why would we if we're not in the Old Testament anymore? However, a lot of Jews still celebrate Passover, and non-Jews alike will celebrate Passover because it's a memorial. It's a remembrance of what God did for the Israelites. And if we don't remember all of our history, I find, and we see it documented, that things can repeat itself. So I believe it's important to know more about Passover, whether you celebrate it or not. That's your business. I personally don't celebrate it. I'm a Christian, but I don't go through the process of celebrating Passover. But I have found over the years that it's good to know more and more about the Jewish festivals, the Jewish memorials or celebrations, because there was a time and place that God showed up. And for each of these, there's celebrations to honor and glorify God. In this case, Passover goes all the way back to when the Israelites were in exile. It started with Abraham and Sarah when they worked together. They were desperate for a child. They were trying to have a better life for themselves, and they were willing to lie about a few things. So Abraham and Sarah had gone into Egypt, and she was apparently very beautiful, and the Pharaoh found favor with her. Well, when they introduced themselves to Pharaoh, they didn't introduce themselves as Abraham and Sarah, husband and wife. Abraham thought it would be best if they said she was his sister, because maybe that way the Pharaoh would find more favor, they would have more benefits, life would be better for them. So they lied, and Pharaoh took her as his wife. Well, then these things started happening. These plagues started happening. Bad things started happening. And Pharaoh realized, this isn't your sister, is it? It's your wife. So with that, he became angry, and he started to he declared that they must leave. They had to leave because bad things were happening there in Egypt, and it was all their fault. So he sent them off to Negeb. Well, that was the start of the 430 years in exile. The first 30 years, Abraham and Sarah were on their own in exile. The remaining 400 years included their offspring, and that includes the 40 years they were in the desert with Moses. So this Passover celebration is hundreds of years of being in exile, hundreds of years of being a refugee and not having a home, hundreds of years of feeling like they didn't belong and all these bad things were happening to them. And then Moses was sent to lead them out of Egypt, to take them into the desert. And even through that, bad things still kept happening for those 40 years. But eventually they found their freedom. They were able to get away from Egypt, to get away from slavery, to get away from all of that bondage. And that is where we see Passover. Now, it ends with Abraham and Hagar. We know that Abraham and Hagar had the first son, Ishmael, and we learned that in the last presentation. But he was 86 years old. Then Abraham and his wife Sarah had Isaac, but he was 100 years old. And then he remarried after Sarah's death to Keturah and had 6 more sons. Now, along with all of this, we see that God had promised Abraham he would have a huge family. He'd have more children than stars in the sky. And we see that today. We see that God was faithful in that promise. Abraham has many, many, many generations, thousands and thousands, probably millions of descendants came from Abraham. And it started with these 3 women. Now, along through this, so that helps us to see all of the Israelites. It wasn't just Abraham and Sarah anymore. It was a large family walking through the desert, trying to escape bondage. And this gives us a sense of why Passover is so important. Why would millions of people travel long distances to get to Jerusalem every year to do this Passover? Well, because it was that important. Along with the plagues that were happening, the last one was the death of the firstborn. And this caused the Israelites much distress, which it would for us today too, right? If we knew that the government was going to go through our city and kill all of our firstborn children, any child under 2 years of age, parents, families would do all they could to protect their children. And God made a way to do that. God protected those children of the Israelites. So to kind of wrap this into a nice container of what Passover is, in Hebrew, the word for Passover is Pesach. Again, millions and millions of people go to Jerusalem every year for this pilgrimage. It is important. People are making an investment of their time, money for travel expenses. It's taking days to get there. The celebration of Passover is many days in and of itself. So this isn't just a birthday party that you show up to for 30 minutes or an hour. It's a big celebration that people value. They see a lot of value in this, and they're willing to take risk. They're willing to have cost incurred because this is important. And we think the first Passover happened maybe 1400 or 1500 years before Christ walked the earth. So this is something that's been going on for a very long time. And again, it's the celebration of that freedom from bondage that the Israelites were able to get out of that captivity. Now, along with the 10 plagues, there was blood in the water, frogs everywhere, bugs. There were wild animals, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and then this death of the firstborn. So really Passover wraps it all up as in that this death of the firstborn. This was the one that they needed to sacrifice an unblemished animal. Usually they sacrifice a lamb or a sheep, something that's a certain age that has no blemishes. It's considered a perfect sacrifice. And with that, God told the Israelites to kill this animal, sacrifice this animal, put the blood over their doorpost, and that would mark their family safe so their children wouldn't be harmed. Their child would not die. Now, this is hard for us as Christians in this modern age to understand, but if we take time to reflect, COVID is maybe a similar situation where we knew everybody was confined to their homes. They couldn't leave all across the earth. We were scared of this illness that was happening. It was killing people. And if there was a way that we could mark our doorpost so that no one in our family got sick, no one in our family died of this horrible disease, this horrible virus, we would probably do it. And it was similar to that. Now, I think it was a bigger issue because they had already endured those 430 years of being in exile and having a very difficult life. When COVID hit, many of us, we were living the good life. We had comfortable homes, we had good jobs, we had water and safety and food and shelter in our families. It wasn't like we were living in the desert. It wasn't like we were depending entirely on God to provide for us each day with manna and water. It wasn't like that. And I think in that regard, a lot of Christians are comfortable. We've been comfortable that we have all of our needs met. Well, the Israelites didn't have all of their needs met, and they were very dependent on God, and they wanted to save their families. So by putting this blood over their doorpost, the angel of death passed over their house and saved their child. I'm sure we would do the same today if we were in that position. All right, so more about the Passover details. Now, that was the Passover in the moment, right? When it was happening with the Israelites, those 1400 years before Jesus walked the earth. Today, Passover is still a very methodical process. People do meticulous cleaning of their home. It's a spring cleaning. They want to clean all of the dirt and dust. They want to remove all of the mold and yeast from their fridge. They want to get rid of anything in their pantry that could cause fermentation. They want to make sure that their home is clean, that their bodies are clean, that everything in their environment is pure and holy, that they're offering this holy sacrifice. Now, we don't have to sacrifice an animal anymore. Jesus took care of that. He is the ultimate pure sacrifice. We don't do that anymore. That was the Old Testament, and Jesus changed that. But the Passover details are much the same as they used to be. The Siddur, or the meal that people will eat, includes a hard-boiled egg that symbolizes new life. It includes this paste of fruit and nuts that is a remembrance of the mortar the slaves used to build the Egyptian pyramids. The lettuce at the meal symbolizes hope and redemption. The bitter herbs symbolize the bitterness of bondage. There's salt water that symbolizes the tears of the slaves, and a shank bone that symbolizes the sacrificial lamb. There's a lot of symbolism with the Passover meal. There's a lot of importance and significance with this one festival. So even though we're in the New Testament and we don't have to sacrifice, a lamb or a pure animal anymore, even though we don't do that, it's important, I believe, to remember these historical events, to remember when we talked about Esther, to remember why she fasted and why they have Purim today, the festival of Purim. It's important for us to know more about Passover and why this is so symbolic and so important. With each of these Jewish festivities, it's a remembrance of what God did for them, where God showed up and saved them. And I think that's what's important for us as Christians today. Whether you celebrate this or not, it is still important to know more about these Old Testament festivals and these Jewish festivals that are still being celebrated today. Even if we're Christians and we're not, we're not Jews, we're Christians, but it's important for us to know these events because they're all related to what God has done for us. Now, it's also important to know more about the temple. So the temple is no longer in Jerusalem. However, at the time of Passover, this would have been a special place, a holy place. It's a sacred space, and it deserved utmost reverence. In the Old Testament, they believed that the temple was where they went to meet God. So when they would take sacrificial offerings, it was a way for them to make a sacrifice for God, to ask for prayer, to talk with God. It was a way for them to be close to God. And that's why this temple is so special. For many people today, going to church is similar. I remember when I was born and raised Catholic, and I felt like I needed to be in the Catholic Church to do my prayers, to say the rosary, to light a candle, to kneel and have that very special prayer with God. Now, I said my prayers at home too, but in my time of need, I remember knocking on the doors of the Catholic Church thinking I had to be inside that church. Now, Jesus changed that for us. We don't have to be inside of a church or even at the temple. We can talk to God at any place, anytime. Jesus makes that relationship for us personal and special and immediate. He's always with us. So I've learned over the years that I don't have to be at any one specific place. I don't even have to be in any certain position to pray, to have that conversation with God. I don't have to do that anymore. Jesus changed that for us. But in the Old Testament, this temple was the place, the one and only place where people felt the closest to God. They felt like he was in the temple. In fact, here we see the inner room where the Ark of the Covenant is. And the Ark of the Covenant included the 10 Commandments of Moses. It also included Aaron's staff, a jar of manna, and a scroll that Moses wrote on. All of these important artifacts are inside that Ark of the Covenant. We don't know where that ark has gone to. It's believed it may be in Ethiopia today, but we don't know. But it used to be inside of the inner room at the temple. And the only person that could go into this inner room was a priest. And if the priest was unholy, if they weren't perfect in their human way, if they had made mistakes, if they had sinned, and they walked into that room, they would die. In fact, they would tie a rope around this person because if they died, they'd have to pull them out with a rope. No one else could enter that room. They felt like God was in that room. And if someone approached God that was unholy, God would kill them. So this place, the temple, was so special. It was to be treated with the utmost honor and reverence. A little bit of history about the temple. It was built around 957 BC by Solomon, which is King David's son. And Solomon is the one that we believe to be the wisest king of them all. It was destroyed in 586 BC by King Nebuchadnezzar. It was rebuilt shortly thereafter. So the second temple was erected at the same place in 515 BC. Now, when Jesus came to earth, we know that he talked about the temple and how the temple would fall, it would be destroyed, and it would be raised again in 3 days. That's because Jesus is now the temple. He wasn't talking about the physical building anymore. So when this physical building was attacked in 70 AD by the Romans and destroyed, it was no longer needed. Sure, a lot of people want it back. A lot of people, especially at that time, felt like that's where God is. We need this back. We need this place to go do our sacrificial offerings and to ask for prayer and to, to be close to God. They wanted this place, but it's no longer needed now. There are some efforts, however, to build a third temple. There's been some fundraising going on and some talks about it, but it's important to know that Jesus is the temple. He doesn't need a building. God doesn't need a building like this. But there's so much symbolism and history with the temple that it's important for us to know what it was and where it was and just how special and important this place was. It did deserve the most honor and respect, especially with the Jews. This was so important to them. Now we hear about Jesus going to the temple when he was 12 years old. It's assumed he went every year. Most Jews go every single year. And even though Jesus was not a Jew, it's assumed that he too went. Anybody that believed in God could have went to the temple. You didn't have to be Jew. And Jesus, although he wasn't Jew, he still made that pilgrimage at age 12. He was there. He went through all the festivities, all of the the prayer, the sacrifice, everything. He was there. And then his family made that pilgrimage back after the Passover was over. And they found that he was missing. He was missing for 3 days. It's a long pilgrimage. We'll talk about the distance here in a little bit. It's a very long pilgrimage. And usually they'd go in bigger groups as they're heading back to a specific town. So it was not uncommon that they wouldn't have realized he was missing for 3 days. It was such a big group. There were millions of people making this pilgrimage that he was probably assumed he was with a group of friends or with a different family. So his parents wouldn't have noticed it right away. But when they did notice it, you can imagine the panic in, oh my goodness, where is he? So they rush back to the temple and there they find him. Luke 2:49 says, he was sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. When they questioned why he stayed behind, so that's his parents, they had this earthly worry, like we would. He said, didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? Now, we don't know if at this point in time, Mary and Joseph realized just exactly what role he was playing. They knew that he was God's child because Mary and Joseph had been told when she was pregnant as a virgin. They knew that this was God's child. But it's unknown if between the time he was born and the time he was 12 years old here at the temple, what else happened. But this would have been one of those moments where you realize, that's right, he's not my child, he's God's child. And the maturity that he had to be there talking with the teachers and asking them questions and them talking with him, you can just imagine everybody would have thought, this person's different. He's special. There's something different about him. So that's at age 12. Then now he's coming back at age 28. And at this point in time, Jesus had not formed his 12 disciples yet. He had some of them, but not all of them. And he had also not performed any public miracle to date. Now, right before this event, however, he did perform his first miracle that we know of that's recorded in the Bible, and that was at a wedding in Cana. So we know that he was in Cana right before the Passover. If we look at the map, we see that Cana is about 18 miles to Capernaum, which is another 85 miles from Capernaum to Jerusalem. So it would have been about a 5-day walk if they were walking 20 miles per day, which we believe that could be the case back then. Maybe they were walking about 20 miles a day. But still, a 5-mile journey, and here the parents were 3 days into it before they realized he was missing, and they had to turn around, walk another 3 days back to get him, and then walk 5 days back to get to Capernaum. So you can see that this travel to the temple for Passover was not something fly by night. It was something that a lot of planning had to be put into place. They had to make sure they had food and water. They had to make sure they had some way to sleep and rest. It was something that took a lot of preparation. We believe when he returned at age 28, he probably had with him Andrew, James, John, Nathaniel, Peter, and Philip, but not all of the 12 were with him yet. Now I want to talk a little bit about the wedding in Cana. Just this one slide, because I think this is important to see the contrast between this miracle and the miracle that's about to take place. At the wedding in Cana, they ran out of wine and they needed more wine for the wedding. So this was a miracle where it was private. He didn't make a big scene. He just replaced the water with wine. And all of a sudden there was more wine than they needed, an abundance of wine for this wedding. The Bible talks about how this symbolizes that God works to change the heart of a person and cleanse their soul. In this, we see Jesus performing this miracle, and it was private. It was just within a certain group of people here at the wedding so that they knew that he did this. If you can imagine, though, let's say you're one of those disciples that are with him at the wedding and you see this happen. You see him take just regular old water and turning it into wine. And this wine, the taste would be so spectacular. A taste that you'd probably never tasted before, so perfect, so sweet and succulent. And leaving that and making that walk to the temple, just how their emotions would have been so high because they just witnessed this first miracle that Jesus did. And they're just talking about this wine and this miracle all the way as they walk to Cana, or walk from Cana to Jerusalem. You can just imagine that. And then the closer that they get, things change. Now, depending on where you're at, we know that they were in Cana right before. So we think it probably took, 5 days or so to get there. But depending on where they were, you see up here is Cana. They were going to Jerusalem. Over here is Capernaum. So if they were coming from, let's say, the Sea of Galilee to Jerusalem, it's about 70 miles. If they're going from Nazareth to Jerusalem, it's about 92 and a half miles. And then from Capernaum up here down, maybe 102 miles to Jerusalem. Either way, we need to remember they're walking. So this just adds more of the importance. Why would they walk to Jerusalem for Passover if it wasn't an important event? This was probably one of the most important events that they did every year. And they were willing to make this sacrifice to walk this distance on foot, carrying what they needed to carry with them for all of these miles for many, many days. Now, the issue as they walk into town is that they're not the only ones coming. Millions of people are coming to town for this Passover. Millions of people that are hungry, that are tired, that are irritable, that are dirty, that also need this sacrificial offering. And let's say they bring their offering with them. Now, Josephus says that you could expect about 2.7 million people coming to Passover at this point in time. You only needed one animal per family. So let's say they needed 256,500 animals. And these animals had to be pure, perfect, unblemished. One idea is if they're making this 5-day trek, would the animal still be unblemished after 5 days of travel? Maybe not. If it was, great. If it wasn't, well, they had to buy a new animal. And if they decided it's just not worth the trouble of carrying this animal all that distance, then the family would come knowing that they needed to buy a new animal. Either way, I envision this more of a modern day carnival. And I don't use that with disrespect, but I use that in knowing when you walk through the gate of a carnival these days, you have to buy a ticket. And then with that ticket, you can go purchase food, you can go purchase rides, but you have to have their carnival ticket. The same is true here. They couldn't use their own money. They couldn't barter. They couldn't trade. They had to have a special coin to buy the animal. So they first had to walk in, get into a line to show the high priest their animal if they brought it. The high priest decided if they were going to keep it, approve it, or reject it. Most animals were rejected. And we believe that the reason for that is because they had turned this into a marketplace. This was the one event that brought in the most money to the town. So as more and more people were coming, the high priest, the temple elders, all of the officials in this town thought, this is the way we make money. So let's have a high rejection of animals so that they have to buy more. That way the locals can sell their animals and make money for their families, which also in turn had more taxes to be paid. So you'd stand in one line, get your animal rejected, have to go stand in another line to get your coin, then go stand in another line to buy your animal, and then go stand in another line to have the sacrifice done. Plus, there was a tax that was due. And usually people would pay their tax at this event because it was such a long pilgrimage. They didn't want to have to come back again later in the year. So they'd just go ahead and pay their tax while they were in town. So you also had a table where you had an exchange rate, because whatever your money was, you'd bring it and you'd have to exchange it for this Tyrian coin, which was what was used to pay the tax. The service fees, we believe, at this point in time was 10 to 20% more than usual, just because it was Passover and it was convenient. So the business practice was unethical. There were swindlers, thieves, racketeers. It was extortion. This whole event had turned into an unholy event at the temple. And Jesus was upset, not with the people, but with the business practice. And I think this is what's so important to know about this pericope. Jesus isn't upset that people made the pilgrimage here to honor God. Not at all. Jesus is upset with the way the business practices are being handled with the marketplace. Now, this is the coin that needed to be used. This is the Tyrian coin that they had to purchase. And I think what's important to know is that the government here, the high priest, the chief priest, the temple elders, the government, they had given permission for this business practice to go on. They had given permission for people to have their marketplace within the temple walls. They had even encouraged this to happen. And so they were selling these animals with the approval of the chief priests for dishonest gain. And I think this, to me, relates to our current society. There's so much unethical business practices taking place that we really need to think about what's right and what's wrong. What will we condone? What will we condemn? This unholy marketplace, if you can imagine, this temple that's supposed to be so holy and reverent and sacred, is full of animals. The smell that Jesus would have smelled even before seeing the temple, but probably several miles back, he would have smelled this. He would have heard this noise. And they talk about this being a generation that's morally sick because there's no agreed upon standard to follow. When the government declares that certain things are legal, it doesn't mean that it's right according to the Bible. So for us as Christians, I believe it's important to know that we have biblical standards, and sometimes those biblical standards may not be the same as what's allowed by the government, but we answer to God, and we need to always follow those biblical standards. So we do need to know what's right and what's wrong. That's why I believe I call them lectures, these presentations that I give are so important, because we do need to have some sort of content that's going to educate us on these matters. What's right and what's wrong? How would we know if we're not digging deep into the Bible and understanding all of the context that's taking place? So Jesus' second miracle is the cleansing of the temple. The first one, if you remember, was at the wedding in Cana. It was very private. It was very joyful. It was a happy time. This time it's a scolding in public where he's driving the traitors from the temple. He's concerned with pure worship. He wants the temple to be holy, to be void of distractions. He wants people to have a right relationship with God. And this was clear to him when he walked into the temple, that they did not have a right relationship with God. So his actions were for purification. It was to remove those distractions. And he was vindicating honor of the temple, which was his father's house. So in that, we first cleanse what is wrong so we can then teach what is right. Now, if Jesus had walked into this and started preaching, it wouldn't have had the same effect. He had to first remove all of the wrongness taking place so that then he could come back and explain, this is a holy place. This is my Father's house. This should be treated with utmost honor, respect, and dignity. So he did have holy anger. And I think that's important to know too, is that the Bible teaches us that God can be angry, that God can have fury, that God can judge us, and that God is a just God. Jesus didn't come in here with the legion of angels and kill all people. He didn't come in here with this cord of whips and whip people. No, he used the same cord of whips that the animals would have been used to move into the temple. It's the way that they treated the animals. And he used that same cord to remove them. He didn't use that to go about and whip people. He did that only on the animals. And as he flipped the tables to move the money and to get people to move, it was to cause attention to them to say, this is wrong and you need to get this out of here. He wasn't saying that the marketplace in and of itself was wrong. He was saying that the way they conducted the business inside the temple was wrong. The way they were extorting people and taking advantage of the situation, trying to earn money, was wrong. Now, you could have an exchange of money, but you shouldn't extort money from people where they have to pay 10 or 20 or 30% more just because they're here. This Passover was to be honorable. It was a way to remember what God did with the Israelites to save them from bondage. It was not a way for this town to earn all their money for the year. It was not that. The greed that took place in this situation is what really angered Jesus. And the way he responded was he removed the animals. He removed the money changers. He attacked the business practices. He did not attack the people. So he did this couched with love and compassion, totally with God as his focus. So if we look at the attitude of Jesus, and I think this is what's important to see for us as Christians, yes, God is jealous. God is angry. He's no longer tolerant and understanding and patient. This was taking place right in his own home. And Jesus was trying to right the wrong. He was zealous. He was going to go in, and this wasn't his intention immediately when he left Cana. He didn't know this was taking place. But as he approached this and he saw what was happening, he knew he had to take action. So he confronts sin on his own. He didn't go to the government officials. He didn't go to the religious officials. He didn't ask for a big group of people to come in like an army and support his efforts. He did this on his own. He went in and he confronted this, and he just let them know, this is wrong. Take your stuff and get out of here. He showed contempt and displeasure that made where these people had made religion a worldly gain. And that was wrong. And he could not bear seeing the temple defiled and his Father dishonored this way. So this was Jesus's attitude. He was upset. He was frustrated. He was angry. He was trying to right this wrong. This couldn't take place on his watch, right? This couldn't take place. If Jesus was here, Jesus, the Son of God, was at the temple on Passover at age 28, this could not be taking place. Now, the attitude of others, that's a different thing, right? Because there's more than just one person here. So the attitude of others that we see, you have people saying, well, who are you to do this? What authority do you have? What sign can you show us that you have authority to do this? this attitude of the others, of the spectators at this point, they had made common what was to be solemn and should inspire awe. They had turned this very special event into a mockery. They had found a way that they could take this honorable event to the holy God, the one and only true God, and make money from it. That was wrong. That was wrong. And then in return, instead of saying, oh, you're right, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done this, they want to know, who is this Jesus that's coming in here and turning tables and driving out the animals? Why do you have authority to do this? And this is really where the miracle is taking place, because Jesus could have been in a lot of trouble. He could have been arrested. Bad things could have happened to Jesus at this point, but it didn't. We'll talk more about that in just another minute. So this holy disruption that took place, at its core, Jesus drove out the animals, and he did it with a whip of small cords, and he scattered the money. Those money changers were robbing people. They were robbing those that came to honor God. They were robbing God. So Jesus came to attack the business system. He did not come to attack the people. The miracle that's really taking place here is that Jesus did this without any resistance at all. Over here in the corner, you see it circled. That is Fort Antonio, or Fort Antonia. It was built right next to the holy site, and it had armed guards. It had like police or security in there. Their job was to watch over the temple to keep it safe. So they were there. They would have seen this commotion taking place, but nothing happened. They didn't come in and arrest Jesus. They didn't allow this to return back into the temple. They did nothing. And that's really where the miracle takes place. Jesus could have done this numerous ways. God could have sent an army of angels to just go down and attack everybody. He didn't. Jesus could have recruited a group of people to go in like a militia and do something. He didn't. He went in on his own without any help from others, and he did it without any resistance from anybody. Nobody pushed back. Nobody, screamed for help. They just went. It was in such a way a chaotic, peaceful event, if there could be such a thing. And that's where the miracle took place. So the temple was well secured. There were probably about 300 police on patrol that day. And we believe that, they were there to protect the temple in and of itself and to control the mob. So you could almost imagine if I went into a marketplace and started flipping tables and screaming at people and moving animals and making all this commotion, somebody would swarm in quickly and put me in handcuffs. But that's not what happened at all. This took place in a somewhat organized and peaceful fashion. Jesus was armed with divine power and commission. It's as if God told him to do this, and he did it. And he did it in such a way that it was allowed. That's the miracle that took place. And we don't see any casualties. We don't see where any person got hurt. We don't see where he laid hands on any person. We only see where he threw the tables of money and he removed the animals. And with that would have made a stand to say, enough is enough. This doesn't belong here. Yes, you can still sell animals. Yes, you can still pay taxes and exchange money, but do it outside of these walls and do it fairly. In closing, I want to bring in Romans 12:2 that says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. And Jesus shows us that sometimes we may need to speak up. We may need to take action. We may need to do something so that we can show that this is not honoring God in the way that it should be. Now, I want to caution you and choose your battles wisely, right? There's so much of this going on in the world today that we could go out and just attack everything. Remember, Jesus didn't attack people. He attacked the business process. So if you see such a thing and you want to take a stand, I want you to do this in such a way that's honoring God. Remember, we always bring it back to the Bible so that we know it's right. Look at the 10 Commandments and know that we need to treat people right. We wouldn't go in and hurt people. We also know that the greatest commandment is to love God and love others. So when we're armed with the 10 Commandments and we're armed with the greatest commandment to love God and love others, we know that love is important. We can attack the business principles, attack the business process, and still love people. Sometimes this may mean having a good conversation with somebody to let them know, hey, this is unethical. We shouldn't be doing this anymore. That may be just enough to have a casual conversation between two people to let them know, yeah, maybe you've been doing this like this for a while, but it's not the right way to do it. We should change it. And they may be convicted and they may change it. If not, maybe that needs to be taken to a higher place. And you're a whistleblower at that point to say, this is going on and it's wrong. It needs to stop. Whatever it is, I want you to prayerfully consider that. Prayerfully ask God what it is that you should be doing and how you should go about doing it.